Appearances can be deceiving. What may appear at first glance helpful may on the second and third glances be in fact harmful, as this image shows. This is an art exhibit that has won some international accolades and awards. So as you see, the shadow and the actual object are two entirely different things. Whereas the actual object of this child is innocent, when the shadow, she appears to be the devil. And conversely, the man appears to be an angel who perhaps may be intending some sort of harm on this little girl. So a proper perspective of reality is especially critical when it comes to sin. Our passage this morning depicts Babylon on the one hand as beautiful, with precious jewels, yet on the other hand vile and evil with abominations as its actual jewels. Some, perhaps enticed by the outward beauty of sin, admire sin from a distance initially, to later approach it and indulge in the sin eventually. Others who have proper perspective on sin as only harmful express not only admiration of sin, but abhorrence or hatred to it. The appearance of sin, therefore, evokes two polar responses: either admiration for it or abhorrence, which is another way of saying hatred, against it. The title this morning is thusly, Admiration or Abhorrence, the response to the enticement of sin. We either admire it or we hate it, but there is no middle ground. This morning we will consider why people may admire sin and why people should instead abhor it altogether. So the first point is, people may admire sin because of its financial enticement, which we saw last week, but is even more apparent in this week's passage in verse 4. If you follow along silently, the admiration for sin is because of financial enticements. Now the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned in gold and precious stone and pearls. The use of the same phrase occurs in the next chapter, which confirms that the woman is particularly attractive because of the offer of financial gain. In verse 12, cargoes of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet from very costly wood and bronze and iron and marble. These are the same ornaments and precious stones that adorn this woman who, as we shall see later, seduces unbelievers to get them drunk so that they see her as beautiful and they commit the fornication of idolatry, where they then forsake Jesus for financial gain, as we learned last Sunday. Both in Revelation 17 and 18, John may be alluding to Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 30, where the prophet announces Jerusalem's attempt of seduction of the nations in order to gain some sort of military aid and help against the coming Assyrian invasion in Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 30. Although you dress in scarlet, this is the Lord talking about Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is afraid of the threat of the Assyrian invasion. So Jerusalem then begins to entice and seduce Egypt and the nations to get them to help Jerusalem. And the Lord here is using very strong, seductive and prostitution practices. You dress in scarlet, although you decorate yourself with ornaments of gold. These are typical outerwear of prostitutes. Although you enlarge your eyes with paint, in vain you make yourself beautiful. Your lovers, the nations, Egypt, they will despise you, and they will seek your life. They will kill you. because Jerusalem is supposed to seek after the Lord. But instead, Jerusalem sought to seduce the nations for help, not to seek the Lord for help. But very importantly here, the way by which Jerusalem aims to seduce Egypt is by offering money with gold and precious stones. John then appears to import the situation of Jeremiah chapter 4 in the Old Testament to the situation of the churches in the book of Revelation in the New Testament. Rome, as we have learned, attempted to seduce the Christians in Rome with a promise of financial gain, so long as they cooperate with the expected norm of idolatry. You just have to say, Caesar is Lord. Then you'll have your jobs. Then you'll get your business license. Just got to cooperate. Why do you have to be so difficult? Just say, Caesar is Lord. Money, therefore, is attractive. We have to be real. Are we attracted to money? Shockingly, John himself appeared to have at least entertained the idea of admiration because of financial enticement in his response to the woman with gold and scarlet in verse 6. When I saw her, here's John's response, I wondered with great amazement. Now, this is John, the author, and he appears, at the very least, intrigued or attracted to the woman. Is attraction to sin wrong? Think about that. Is attraction to sin itself? John appeared enticed. She saw the beautiful woman, and he saw her like, whoa, amazed. This financial enticement. If anything, I would suggest attraction to sin indicates that we live in a sin-infested world, right? That there is not one square inch in our existence where sin has not extended its influence and its power, including our hearts and our thoughts. I would think that in the new heavens and the new earth, there will be no more enticement to sin because there's no more sin. Because Jesus will eradicate entirely the presence of sin. In the meanwhile, as we wait for that blessed day, I think it is normal to be enticed by sin. The question then is it a sin to be enticed by sin? I don't think it is so. But if you begin to admire sin, it becomes sin. When you think the grass is greener on the other side. Man, I'm poor because I don't confess Caesar as Lord. If I only just confess Caesar as Lord, look at what he has. Big home, nice cars. Jealous. Must be nice. Must be nice. A momentary attraction to sin ought not lead to a sustained admiration for it, as the angel appears to have rebuked John for admiring the woman who figuratively signified financial gain in verse 7. But the angel said to me, the but here is a strong but, like, wake up, snap out of it, John. But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I'll tell you who this mystery of this woman is. She's the mother of the prostitutes. Wake up! Don't be enticed by sin. Don't be attracted to sin. Don't admire sin from afar off. Fight it. Abhor it. Hate it. Instead of admiration for financial enticements, there ought to be abhorrence against it, because Jesus is our treasure. A truth best learned in suffering and poverty, as the churches in the book of Revelation demonstrate. Chapter 17, verse 6. We should have instead abhorrence against financial enticement, because Jesus is our treasure himself. Now the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned in gold and precious stone and pearls, like a beautiful woman. For holding in her hand a golden cup of abominations and unclean things of her fornication. That word "but" there is very strong. But, don't forget, she may look beautiful. It's all makeup. She may look beautiful. It's plastic surgery. She may look beautiful. It's Instagram filters. But, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and unclean things of her fornications, and on her forehead was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of the earth's prostitutes and abominations. Whom everything is beautiful, that's who she is, in reality. And I saw the woman drunk from the blood of the saints and from the blood of the witnesses of Christ. So at first glance, this woman appears to be very attractive with gold and precious stones, yet upon closer inspection, this woman is in fact vile and hideous, with a cup full of abominations and unclean things, a prostitute drunk with the blood of the saints. She seduces people. You would have to be intoxicated to be attracted to her. You got to be drunk to consider her pretty. Because if you're sober, she's not attractive at all. That's what it's saying. So if you think money is to be admired more than Jesus, you got to be drunk. Because if you're sober, you will see that it is an abomination. Instead of admiration for financial enticements, there ought to be abhorrence against it, because Jesus is our true treasure. As we see once again in chapter 17, verse 6. Now the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and was adorned in gold and precious stone and pearls. Now these same clothings are applied to Jesus. So there is a sense here of a cheap imitation. This woman is an imposter. In Revelation chapter 21, verse 21, and the 12 gates were 12 pearls, talking about the city in Jerusalem where Christ will dwell. Each of the gates was a single pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, like transparent glass. That's our treasure. That's true gold, not fake gold. We got diamonds, not Rubik zirconia, right? Is that the way you say it? I don't even know how to say it. Cubic. Again, in Revelation chapter 19, verse 8, it was given to her to clothe herself in fine linen, bright and clean. Notice the same verb is used in chapter 17, verse 6. Now the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet. But look at the clothing of the saints in fine linen, bright and clean. Not this seductive red dress. For the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. That's what we should be attracted to. righteousness, godliness, Christ-likeness, not purple, scarlet, gold, precious stones. The AP News on March 22, 2017 reported a case of teenagers arrested for selling fake gold bars outside a supermarket as real gold. Now, who would buy gold bars outside of a supermarket? But people did, apparently. In Oregon, police have arrested 2 teenagers in Central Oregon for allegedly selling fake gold bars to unsuspecting adults in the past year. The Bend Oregon police said in a news release that officers arrested 2 17-year-old boys on Tuesday for multiple accounts of aggravated theft by deception and by conspiracy. Police say that the teens brought in more than $50,000 selling the counterfeit gold to adults in Bend and Redmond who are looking to buy the precious metal on Craigslist. So don't trust Craigslist. Police first heard reports of the transactions in late February and say additional reports were made in March by identifying the suspects. The boys allegedly bought the look-alike gold bars online and sold them as authentic bars to men ranging in age from 29 to 65. The teens were booked into juvenile detention center. It looks like real gold, the real thing. Just like this woman. She's also dressed in gold and precious stones. But it turns out to be fake, a cheap imitation. To claim that fake gold is real gold is not only a crime worthy of arrest, but is in itself blasphemy, deserving of eternal destruction in hell. As we see in verse 3. And he carried me in spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting upon a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names. And it has 7 heads and 10 bars. The blasphemy here in particular has to do with the false claim of the sovereignty of the woman, because the parallel use of the same phrase is tied to the false sovereignty of the beast in chapter 13, verse 1. So this blasphemous names has to do with false claim of kingship and dominion because of its parallel use in chapter 13, verse 1. And now I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads and blasphemous names on its heads. If you remember this preaching, I doubt you do, but the background for Revelation chapter 13, about 3 months ago, is Daniel chapter 7, where Daniel interprets the dream, or I'm sorry, not the dream, but the vision, and the last beast had 10 horns, which signified 10 kingdoms who arose from the ocean itself. And if you remember the chapter of Daniel chapter 7, the Son of Man comes and he defeats all the beasts and all the horns, and the Son of Man's kingdom is established forever, whereas the rest of the kingdoms of the earth are thereby defeated, and their reign was only temporary. That's the context. That's the background. So to have a blasphemous name then is to have a false claim of sovereignty, that you rule eternally. That's a lie. Only the Son of Man rules eternally. In chapter 17, verse 14, and the Lamb will overcome them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are the called and chosen and faithful. In this way, the blasphemous name is the false attribution of sovereignty and kingship to anyone or to anything but Jesus himself as the rightful King of kings and Lord of lords. To say Caesar is Lord is blasphemy. It's a false claim of sovereignty. It is a lie. Jesus is Lord. He is King alone. As we conclude, let us consider the following challenge that is before us this morning. this. I put it in two ways. First way, though attraction to sin may be involuntary, as a necessary byproduct of living in a sinful world, right? We can't help but be attracted to sin. Or am I the only one? Does everyone else gain a sense of attraction to sin? I'm sure you do. But that may be involuntary because we live in a sinful world. It's just a byproduct of living in a world that Adam messed up for us, and we help mess up this world by our own sin too. Yet admiration of sin is voluntary and is in itself a sin. So when I was taking my biology, they have involuntary muscle movements and voluntary muscle movements. And you can excuse the involuntary ones, but the ones you can control, there's no excuse for those things. Therefore, let us abhor, which means hate. I just like to alliterate admiration with the A and abhorrence, another A. Let us abhor, not admire, sin, because all the purported attracting qualities of sin are nothing more than cheap imitation of the real thing, Christ the Lord. Charles Spurgeon said famously, I think his statement applies. He said that you cannot help if a bird would fly over your head. Right? I don't control the birds. But it is your fault if the bird begins to build a nest on your head. What is he saying? Sometimes you can't help but be attracted to sin. But if you dwell, admire, let that bird build a nest on your head, then you get closer and closer and closer. And just like the angel, we need rebuke. Wake up. The bird is building its nest. Do not admire sin. The grass is never greener. Jesus alone is our treasure. They don't have it better than you. Do you believe that? Do you believe that you have a better life right now than Kobe Bryant? Do you believe that? Do you believe you have a better life right now than Leonardo DiCaprio? Do you believe that? Because you have Jesus. John Piper puts it this way in his book, This Weight of Glory. And it's always good to quote John Piper when they talk about desiring for God, and God is our treasure. If you consider the unblushing promises of reward and the staggering nature of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. You guys catch that? If you're settling for worldly pleasure, your problem is not that your desires are strong, but rather your desires are too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday by the sea. We are far too easily pleased. The problem with sin is not that the attraction is too strong, but that our pleasure is too weak. We have a low standard. We would rather eat cheap imitation crab than Alaskan king crab legs, fresh from the ocean. You would rather eat a strip steak from Denny's than a prime Kobe beef from Ruth's Chris. Your problem and our problem is our pleasures are too weak. We easily settle for sin, and we think it's the best thing ever. When Jesus offers us infinite and true joy in His presence forevermore. And I can't get you to believe this unless you are born again by the Spirit. And if you're Christians at all, then we are convicted by our attraction to sin. I tell myself, Joel, don't think about it. It's not that big a deal. It's not that important. You're far too easily pleased, Joel. Jesus gives you greater joy than any of these things. Do you believe that? Do you really believe that? Or do you envy sin and have admiration for it? Because if you do, there's judgment that will await you. And if you're on that boat, you came at the right time. As the angel did to John, came at the right time. Why do you marvel, John? Why are you attracted to this woman? Don't admire it. Abhor it. Don't entertain it. Flee from it. Run to Jesus. Let me call on the elders to come forward. God's judgment against Babylon, because she's the source, the supplier of the sin of the unbelievers that they commit against the Lord. In short, she's the bartender who supplies, sees this unbelievers with the alcohol and the Yes, we are responsible